Yamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Come on. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 1, 2, 3. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Gita Gora Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Gita Gora Hare Bol, Gita Gora Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Gita Gora Hare Bol. Jai Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yeah, I need this here, leave this here, leave this here. Do we have the top of this harmonium? The top part? No, the top part? It goes on top. There is one. This is the bottom, and there's a top. I need the top. Ah, this is it. Perfect. What do we have to do? Enable? Yeah? So, I was told to speak about Srila Prabhupada, some of his pastimes, that I had the really good fortune to visit from basically 1972 one all the way to his last days. And so, let me just pull something off here. There we are. What is that? We don't want that. Where are the, oh, this is the wrong one. It's not the right one, that is it. Okay, here we go. No. I thought I had made a PowerPoint presentation, but I can just pull up the pictures individually. It is not as slick as it could be, but it will do. Pictures. So here we are. That's the one. Pictures. Okay, here we go. When Srila Prabhupada came to Amsterdam in 1974, I was initiated sometimes in the year, I think it was October. And so when Prabhupada came, I don't know whether it was in the same year or in the following year actually, all the devotees went from Germany and from France and from different places to Amsterdam, Holland, because this was kind of the system. And Prabhupada came one place, say London, many people came from all over Europe to London. When he was in Paris, everybody migrated to London. It was like a Grateful Dead tour. Prabhupada was greeted by so many devotees because everybody wanted to see Srila Prabhupada. There was our chance. And so when he came to Amsterdam, it's a very interesting story. I had come just the day before on a flight from Germany. And consequently, I knew where the immigration is. At that time, Prabhupada had come to immigration. And so I ran upstairs alone while the devotees were downstairs at the conveyor belts to pick up his luggage. And so when I came home, I saw Prabhupada, that he was standing there in the immigration. And I can't find this picture right now, but this is already a good picture. You see me here. Srila Prabhupada, Professor Durkheim, and myself in the middle when I was young. The body was young. And so when I saw Srila Prabhupada, I lifted up my camera, and right then I could see in my viewer, he was lifting up his hand and waving. And so I made a picture of that. And I can't find it right now, but it's a very special picture to me, because there was my first time a very intense relationship was established. And Prabhupada was waving. There was nobody behind me, left or right. I was alone. And so I knew immediately that this is my spiritual master and my father, my spiritual father. And I must say, I became, overwhelmed by contradictory feelings between laughing and crying. It was a happy crying. You know, I was trembling, you know, when I saw Prabhupada. And I paid obeisance, of course, and I saw his feet passing by right in front of me, going downstairs. And so Prabhupada went to the VIP hall. There was a VIP room for very important persons. If they want to be interviewed by some journalists, there were some journalists there. And you see, Prabhupada's English is very special. It is Bengali English, actually. When he says birds, there are many birds in the forest. What is birds? I could not understand, but I could now understand these are birds. Many birds in the tree, birds, many birds. And so in the morning, I listened to a tape of Prabhupada, and I could understand of this tape only, say, 50%, no more, because the rest was Bengali English. And then when he spoke to these fellows, these journalists, I was surprised that I could understand everything he said all of a sudden. And this happened then throughout the interview. When we went back with Prabhupada, I put the same tape on that I listened to in the morning, being able to comprehend 50%. I could understand 100% from one moment to another. This was very special. Prabhupada had said, Shakti. He could do that, make you understand. And you see, I saw recently one interview where one journalist said, why are you driving in a Rolls Royce? It was in Melbourne, in Sydney, Melbourne, one of these towns where people, one rich life member offered a Rolls Royce, and Prabhupada said, whatever people offer me, if somebody offers me a Rolls Royce, why shouldn't I take it? And I saw this in Amsterdam. We had a VW bus, and Prabhupada drove in the front of the VW bus. There was a driver there, another devotee there, and Srila Prabhupada. We were 17 devotees in the back, 17. I mean, think about it, we were on top of each other, all going to see Srila Prabhupada at the airport. Prabhupada did not care. Sometimes we picked him up another time. It was just in a small, like a Ford Fiesta or something, of that size, a very small Ford car. I think it had only 2 doors. And Prabhupada drove happily to the temple. I have this picture actually here, but I'm not sure that I will find it. Let me try. And able. It may take too much time to do that. Here. Let's see, how do I go further? Excuse me, Prabhu, that I'm so unorganized. Maybe I take that here. Let me see. Somebody has to help me and get this properly in a presenting mode. Maybe that one. No, that one. No. I won't find it. It will interrupt our conversation. So I didn't find it. And Srila Prabhupada, he was completely unattached to such things. And when he came to the temple, there was an initiation. The temple was actually a garage. It was a huge 2 doors swinging open, and it was a garage, repair shop. And we turned into a quite beautiful temple. And so at that day, there was an initiation. There were some devotees initiated, and there was also Akhoyananda Prabhu. He became Akhoyananda Swami. And there was an interesting event. I was in a shock initially. We were all singing, the Havan was ready, and Prabhupada came in, sat down, and he looked at the Havan and said, "Where are the flowers? Where are the flowers?" He became more and more loud. "Who is responsible there? Where are the flowers?" He became angry. "Krishna has no flowers. Where are the flowers?" Srila Prabhupada, there's a television team there. "And I don't care into the television, said he, "and I don't care for television. I care that Krishna has no flowers." You see, Prabhupada did not care for public opinion at all, not at all. I tell you, I read to you a little thing that's really dear to me. Come, here we go. Where Prabhupada expresses this very graphically, the people. The people may, still it doesn't come up. Bear with me. Bear with me. Otherwise, I will just repeat it to you as good as I can. He said, they went under a bridge in Boston, and there was under the bridge was painted. There was a sign there, unalloyed steel, because Pittsburgh. It was in Pittsburgh, actually, I think. Is a steel city. He said the people may not, and he said, you see, they have unalloyed steel, and we have unalloyed devotion. And then his Pradumna said, what if people don't understand our message? What? And Prabhupada, the people may not understand our message, but Krishna will be pleased. And that is the main thing. He said, we will say to the desert, we'll cry in the desert, he said. We'll say to the stars, we say to the moon, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God, and whatever people think of that. It was very impressive. People might not understand. Give me another try here, please. Yeah. Oh, Prabhu, this is horrible. Anyway, so the people can, and he said, we want to have this certificate from Krishna, that this man has done something to me, for me, not popularity. He said, not popularity. If hundreds and thousands of fools say you're very good, what is the use of that? So you see, Prabhupada was always concerned with Krishna. That's the main thing. And our relationship with Krishna. The public he did not take very serious. Not important. What people think, today they think this, tomorrow they think that. Today they praise you, tomorrow they define you. People are changing always. They're not considered to be very important. But Krishna is important. And that shines throughout his work, that he was mostly concerned with Krishna's satisfaction, because that is what the devotee is all about. So in this scene in the temple room, he was not at all concerned with the television would say. He was concerned that Krishna had no flowers. And when we offered the flowers, everything was fine. And so throughout our stay in Amsterdam, I remember there was a lecture in one, in a huge park, Vondel Park. And a journalist jumped on the stage. We were all sitting, Prabhupada was speaking. The journalist came closer and closer with his camera, and we were so we didn't know what to do. So finally, he went to Prabhupada and put his lens on Prabhupada's eyes. And still we didn't know, I was boiling. My blood was boiling in anger, but I didn't know what should I do. We were just shocked. And then Prabhupada said, "Ciao," the guy was just like, I never heard that before. "Ciao," The guy was like a fly. When you go like that, the fly flies away. That was the end. And then I saw one of my godbrothers, Chakravarti Prabhu. He went behind this man. And then I heard 100 yards away, there was a huge thing. And I immediately understood that he satisfied his anger by beating this man. And when I understood this, I must say I was very satisfied to hear that this man didn't go unpunished. I mean, by the way, there's an incident when Srila Prabhupada was in Los Angeles. The devotees were reporting that there was one man, he would come and he would take his books, our books, and rip it into pieces and threw it into the garbage can. So it so happened that one soldier, one Vietnam soldier, devotee, he came shortly before that, and he heard the story, and he told the devotee, "Leave this up to me, I handle this case." And so he went to the airport and he saw that this man would come up to the devotees and rip the books 3-4 times. And he's just watching it. And then this man went to the toilet and this devotee went behind him. And the man couldn't get up after that, I tell you that. So Prabhupada, when he heard this, he said, I forgot now the name of this devotee. He would come to me. He said, "Where have you been today?" I said, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, I went to the airport." "Yes, and what did you do at the airport?" He said, "I was just watching the book distributors." And Prabhupada, and then what happened then? Prabhupada had to pull this bit for bit out of his nose, practically speaking. "Well, Prabhupada, there was one man, he would come up and he would take a book of the devotees and he would destroy it, he would rip it." Prabhupada said, "Yes." And then what happened then? I said, "Prabhupada, I was very angry." Prabhupada said, "Yes, I can understand." And then what happened then? He said, "Well, I went to the toilet." And then, "What did you do on the toilet?" "I met this man, Srila Prabhupada." And then what did we do with him? I gave him a really good beating. And Prabhupada said, "Very nice." There was a tape around. I don't know if it's still in the archives. We heard this Srila Prabhupada saying "very nice" hundreds of times. We played it back. We enjoyed it so much that Prabhupada approved of that. Prabhupada could become extremely angry at times when he saw Krishna or his devotees were troubled in any way. He could, I've seen that there was a festival somewhere, I think it was in Bombay, and the Naxalites, the communists, they tried to pull a devotee down from the stage, and Prabhupada was in the middle of Jaya Radhama singing, and he jumped up. Prabhupada jumped up from his asana and took his cudgel and smashed the guy on the head. I mean, he had a wound. And all the people ran away from Prabhupada. He became so upset that somebody tries to pull a devotee from the stage. So Prabhupada could be quite angry. I've been in the middle of Prabhupada's anger 3 times, 3 occasions. And boy, it is unforgettable how Prabhupada, from peace, all of a sudden he sees I go? Okay. And there's an interesting statement I recently read of a godbrother of Prabhupada, Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj. He was very dear to Prabhupada, And he always glorified Prabhupada at any occasion. There are two Puris. We call it the younger one, he was a little younger, and the old one, he became 104 years old. And both of them were very, very supportive of Srila Prabhupada and appreciate his extraordinary work. And so he said, and I think you should see this here, why not? Why is it not on the screen? He tries. I read it to you, those who try to preserve the principles of religion world will have to show their approval for so many conflicting doctrines. You have to compromise. If you want to be happy to the world, you have to compromise. That the approval to so many conflicting doctrines that the purity of true religion will be lost. Rather than serving the pure spiritual religion, they become servants of public opinion instead. Though they may receive applause, whoops, what happened now? So they may receive applause. So they may receive applause from the people at large. They cannot do them any good, because you can only do people good if you actually elevate them in Krishna consciousness. And that is not by trying to please them. It's trying to save them by giving them Krishna Katha, Hari Katha, Bhagavatam, Hare Krishna mantra, and prasadam. No one can preserve their principles without being aloof from the opinions of the world. So that's very important, that we have to not be concerned what people think. Of course, we don't misbehave naturally, but what people ultimately think, we don't care. I mean, we have Harinam in Germany so many times, and people would spit on us. You know, somebody went and it was bizarre. And we laughed, of course, you know, so funny. I remember I was sitting with my wife and a couple of devotees in Munich on the street, and we were singing, and then we stopped, and then some old, dressed in Bavarian clothes, some old man, he said, stop with this Negro jazz. He said, you should stop with this Negro jazz. I mean, he considered the Hare Krishna mantra Negro jazz, you know, jazz. And we laughed so much when we heard that, you know, how people are incapable to appreciate sometimes the spirituality of the Hare Krishna movement. And there's a very, very famous sentence by one American author. He said, that marries the spirit of the day, right? Religion that marries the spirit of the day will be a widow tomorrow. You see, if you marry the spirit of the day with all its ideas, you will be that religion will be a widow tomorrow, because the mind of the people at the time always changes at every moment. So I remember in Amsterdam, Prabhupada, we took morning walks in this in the fields of this park. And there were at least 20,000 hippies there. I mean, you have to understand the situation of the 60s. Prabhupada, when he was in India, he could not do so much. He could particularly not get young people to do something, because you need young people if you want to do something. The Indian Army also, they want young people. I can't go to the Indian Army with 75 years, not possible. So when he came to the West, he hit a gold mine. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of young people protesting against the Vietnam War. That's how it started. And then against society in total as being so materialistic. And then the next step is, what is actually the goal of life? And so it was a mix. Some people were very intelligent. There are many intelligent people among them, students from the university, other simple people. And so they were looking for spiritual life at that particular time. And I remember one time in Amsterdam, we had a meeting for Srila Prabhupada, a hall rented in Krasnodar Hotel, Krasnoyarsk Hotel. And when Prabhupada arrived, or just before Prabhupada arrived, there were only very few people there. And so we went on the main square, which was just 100 yards away, a huge roundabout in front of the palace of the Queen. And there were thousands of people. The square was as big as Connaught Circle. Thousands of people sitting down and smoking and singing and dancing. And it was the typical cross-section of that society, that alternative society. And we just told them, a Swami from India has arrived right now. And there will be a lecture, and then there will be singing and dancing. And there will be a huge vegetarian feast. I mean, 300, 400 people immediately stood up and followed. It was unreal. And the hall was packed within minutes. And so then Prabhupada started speaking. And then he realized that this particular group of people were too intoxicated. So Prabhupada had a little kirtan, and then he laughed. And he said, Hansaduta was sitting there, I was sitting beside. He said, these people cannot understand anything. He said, I'm going. He said, feed them prasadam and have kirtan. That's all we can do. And he got up, he didn't speak a word, because he could see, he could understand what kind of people were there. That type of people he didn't want. He wanted to have people who were inquisitive, who would ask questions. And people did ask questions. Like I remember we went to Stockholm, this Prabhupada, and there was a lecture in one university in Stockholm. And the public, the university was known to be very leftist, socialist, communist, anarchist. Everything on the left side was there. And so Prabhupada, when he realizes immediately these people are very rebellious. And so he said, after the dry run, we want to talk about the 4 classes of man, which is just the opposite what people think. There's only classless society, communism. We talk about 4 classes of men. And Prabhupada started talking about first-class men, second-class men, third-class men, and fourth-class men. And people started to boil. You know, as one person stood up and said, Swami, do you think you are a first-class man? Sitting on a high throne in front of all of us, covered with flowers. You think you're first class? Yelling at Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, no. He said, no, you misunderstand me. Very humbly, you misunderstand me. He said, I'm not first class. I'm actually 5th class. And I was sitting there seeing behind his spectacles, these 2 big tears coming down his cheeks, you know. Dead silence in the room. Prabhupada said that I'm 5th class. And then he said, because I'm the servant of everyone. I mean, it was gorgeous, a gorgeous, glorious moment where you could see Prabhupada, you know, that he understood himself as dasa, 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 no dasa, the servant of everyone. And it was such an amazing moment that I could see that he became moved, that he was misunderstood by this person. You know, he became really, you saw his innocence like a child. And then he started crying because I'm the servant of everyone. And everybody looked at this person like a demon, you know, all looked back at him. You know, he didn't say a word anymore for the rest of the lecture. So Prabhupada was at every moment he was with Krishna, and he was seeing that these people are innocent, they're trying to understand Krishna conscious philosophy in some way or another, and he tried to preach to them in this way. So there are many instances where you see Prabhupada talking. One time, I know it was in Amsterdam. No, this was I was in England, in Britain. We walked over the fields, and there was a sign there, and Prabhupada took his cane and said, what does that mean, that signs? He couldn't figure it out. And my godbrother, Rohini Nandan, he said, Srila Prabhupada, I think it means this. And Prabhupada said, please don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you know. Thinking you can do in the closet. He said, you can lock yourself in a closet and you can think, but you have to say what you know, not what you think. It was very concise how Prabhupada puts this in a couple of words. He was a master in that. I remember in Germany, I was managing the festival when Prabhupada was there. And I had a magnetic board. You know, it's a board where you can put all the names on little magnetic sticks. Listening? Hi, board. On little magnetic names, like you have on a fridge. Sometimes people with some magnetic silly Donald Duck or something. So I had all the names of devotees on this board. There was a Sankirtan devotees, the kitchen department, the temple department, the cleaning up department. Everybody was there. And I was managing right after Prasadam because I was running that thing. And so I took this devotee from here to there. All of a sudden, somebody was behind me. I looked at, oh, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was right there, watching what I was doing. I paid my obeisances. And Prabhupada said in his deep voice, he said, what is that? And I said, Srila Prabhupada, this is a board, how I manage all the devotees in this place. And he said, do it. And so I took this devotee from here to there, that to there, that to there. He said, how does that work? He said, it's magnetic. Oh, it's a magnetic board. And then Prabhupada said, can I try that? I said, sure, Srila Prabhupada. He said, all right, let's take this devotee from here to there, this Brahmachini from there to there, from the kitchen into the book distribution to cleaning up, etc. And then he looked at me, was managing, he looked at me, I was standing there, very serious, and said, and all this will fail. He said, unless there's love and trust. Such a remarkable statement. All this will fail. All management in the world will fail among devotees if there's no love and trust. It's the most important ingredient, that there's always love and trust, because in this way, our society is kept together. And he made this point, above all men, that is the most essential thing. Everything will fail if this most ingredient element of interhuman relationships is missing, love and trust. So that was a remarkable moment. And we saw Prabhupada in his entire stay that he always picked the main point. He always showed us what is the main point in this particular discussion. I remember we were doing book distribution, and quite a bit. At that time, actually, the German book distributors were leading the book distribution in the world. And so when he came to Britain, to the Bhaktivedanta Manor, we arrived in the morning, we heard Prabhupada wanted to talk to us. We were excited. We just jumped into our vans, crossed the channel for a couple of hours, and reached London out of our breath, practically speaking. And before we even could take shower, we heard Shamashunda, was it, or somebody came and said, Prabhupada want to meet you immediately. And so we went in his room, awesome, there Prabhupada was sitting completely peaceful. If you entered Prabhupada's room, you were in peace. No matter, even if you were the most troubled mind, you became very peaceful. He had this atmosphere around himself of complete peace and relaxation. So we all sat down, and Prabhupada said, now, you're distributing these books. What is the most important verse of all? And so I had read with my with the Sankirtan boy that I used to travel, and we both lifted our fingers. We couldn't, it was just automatically, as if we were controlled by the super soul. We are controlled. We lifted our hands. And so we said, the same verse, Yada Dikata Ka Krishna Upadesh. And Prabhupada said, yes. That is the most important verse. Wherever you go, there you preach Krishna consciousness. Then he asked, and he looked at me, that's why I'm telling you the story, it's my personal experience. He looked at me and said, what does Upadesh mean? And I said, well, Desh means place. You know, you have, Desha means also place, that's also true. You have Radha Desh is our place in Belgium. And then you have What is the place where the famous chief minister Lalu is residing? Huh? Bihar. That's another. Yeah, it doesn't, the word Desh doesn't appear there. So Desh, Prabhupada said, it means also place, but what it really means is Krishna Upadesh, means the supreme instruction of Krishna. He said that you have to understand the supreme. What is that supreme instruction? I was completely confused by that time. Prabhupada, I don't remember, he said, Sarvadharma Prijajya. He said, that is the most important verse of all, that we surrender to Krishna, then he will free us from all sinful reactions. And then he looked at us very seriously, all of us, and he said, not that only that you read my books, you distribute my books, you have to also read my books. It's very important. And another time said, unless you read my books, I cannot help you. There was another statement of Srila Prabhupada. So I remember also in Sweden on this morning walk, he said, do you hear this dog? There was a dog barking, big dog, woof, 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 not small. He said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. He said, Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, took birth in India, in Sweden as a dog. He said, I heard from my godbrother, who knows a famous astrologer. And think about that in one life you're the Prime Minister, in the next life you may be a dog. That's not a career, really. You know, this is not a very fortunate situation. And our next life should be better than this present life. We should work in Krishna. Ultimately, we want to go back to the spiritual world. But we were shocked when we heard that it is possible, even from a position of a prime minister, to fall into this position of a dog. So I remember one time on the same event in Sweden, the Indian ambassador came to Sweden. Nice man. And Prabhupada told him they should give up everything and just worship Krishna. Bhadra Govinda, he said, but Swamiji, I cannot give up drinking wine. And Prabhupada said, it's easy. If you chant, you'll give up wine. He said, I can't. Swamiji, the one thing, everything else I can follow, but I cannot give up it. And Prabhupada said, if that is so, then if you drink, you should think that Krishna is a taste in wine, like Krishna is a taste in the ocean, in water. He said that, and it was such a nice way to get this man somehow or other, whatever it takes, to think of Krishna. Prabhupada was very, very merciful. There was one devotee, a servant of him. Prabhupada knew he was taking intoxication. And I don't think he told him that Prabhupada actually knew that, but he didn't say anything for now. And so one time, this man came to Prabhupada and he was so intoxicated that he took his clothes off in front of Prabhupada. I mean, we have seen so many things in Western countries, it's not surprising. He took his clothes off. And Prabhupada became really angry from one moment to another and chased him out of the door. Get out. So this boy left. And then one devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, if he comes back, would you forgive him? Prabhupada said, yes. He said, but Prabhupada, he committed such an offense. He said, Lord Nityananda's mercy is unlimited. It was so nice that he said that, you know, Lord Nityananda's mercy is unlimited. So Prabhupada was unlimitedly kind. Some of his disciples were failing, and he was encouraging them to practice Krishna consciousness. He never, I know only one person he kicked out, but nobody else. He always wanted people to stay inside. He said it takes so much to bring a person to the point of consciousness. Take gallons of blood, he said. And so we have to consider this, that every person who joins the Krishna conscious movement is a very important person in the eyes of Prabhupada. You know, you cannot join from one day to another. There must be some history from a past life. And so Prabhupada was very kind to everybody. Anybody who approached Prabhupada, Prabhupada was very kind and personal. And so this I saw throughout his stay. One time he came to Paris, and he was very tired. He took a night flight from New York, So you arrive about at 5 o'clock or something, earlier even. And so immediately he took a bath and he came to the lecture, and the Vyasa-san was gigantic, huge, I mean like a bed, practically speaking. And Prabhupada sat in one corner. It was very funny to see. It was a huge asana, and then Prabhupada was lecturing, and he yawned sometimes, and he, a little bit like this here. And then after some time, he put his legs on the Vyasa-san. Then he put his head on this pillar, and then he fell asleep. And everybody said, I mean, he was so natural, like a child, you know, fell asleep. And then all of a sudden, so Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, he would continue preaching as if nothing happened. That was Prabhupada. And so at the end of the class, somebody said, Srila Prabhupada, sometimes you said this and that. And Prabhupada said, did I say that? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. Who said? Well, I heard in Los Angeles, somebody said, Prabhupada said, somebody said, what does that mean? He said, it was nice to see this all coming out of his own mouth. He said, there's many, Srila Prabhupada said this and Srila Prabhupada said that, but Srila Prabhupada never said that. It was just wonderful how he spoke, you know. And I think, unfortunately, I can't show you right now, but there's a picture where we're carrying Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa-san. I'm right there carrying Srila Prabhupada to the place in the garden where this initiation took place, in the garden. And so what else happened? Let's go back to Germany. In Germany, I remember that we bought, or didn't buy, but we rented a very first-class place. It was a castle. It was an old place, beautiful place. And Prabhupada loved it. And so if you are able to buy such a big place or rent a place, you must have money. And so people respected that. There were many respectable people in the neighborhood. It's the richest area of the town, actually. And so we had an engagement there in one hotel. And when we came to the hotel, I saw there was a couple of Rolls Royce there. There was Mercedes, there was BMW, the finest cars there are. And we understood this is a very good audience. There's no question of working class or hippies or something. And so we came into the hall, and Prabhupada saw on the stage there was a big Vyasa-san. And all these people were there, beautifully dressed, I mean, first class with ties. And the haute volée, the people who fly the highest, as you say in French, haute volée. And Prabhupada looked at the Vyasa-san and he said, you should immediately take this Vyasa-san out. And the Ruta said, why should we do that, Prabhupada? It's your Vyasa-san. He said, no, I can feel the people have become envious. You could feel that. You know, there was envy in the air. So he asked Sandharuta to immediately put a chair there. So he put a chair there, and people were wondering what was happening. And then saw Prabhupada coming on the stage and sitting on the chair. And immediately people started clapping because they appreciated that in front of them, who were big people, he didn't want to sit on a throne. He just sat on a normal chair. It was so beautiful how Prabhupada could feel the mentality of people. He could understand. I mean, if you stood in front of Srila Prabhupada, he could understand you. I remember we had an initiation on that very venue, and there was one boy, he became initiated that day, and he was before a butcher. He was a butcher, a simple working class person, worked very hard in the temple, but he was a butcher. Everybody here says butcher? You know what a butcher is? Somebody who kills animals. And so Prabhupada was initiating him. And so he heard what are the 4 regulative principles from this boy. And then Prabhupada gave the beads, and just before the boy could touch the beads, Prabhupada pulled the beads back and said, you have to promise me one thing. He said, don't kill any animals anymore. So we all knew that he was a butcher, but we were astounded that Prabhupada knew that. And he could, by looking in his face, Prabhupada looked in his face and he understood that he was a butcher. The same thing happened in New York, that Prabhupada was initiating somebody. Looking in his face, he could understand he was a butcher. And these are the most fallen. You know, the butcher should actually never die. There's this saying, Brahmachari die immediately, butcher never die. But we have given so many books to butchers. You know, I remember Kadambakana Swami was telling me that one time there was one of his disciples in Amsterdam on the street distributing books. And he saw that on the other side, 2 policemen were watching him. It's not allowed to do that. And so they started coming over to him. And so he ran. And there was a little side street. He ran into the side street. There was a door. He opened the door, closed the door, and he saw through the window the cops were passing by. So he was in dark, otherwise it was dark, and he saw a light there. And he walked towards this light. And all of a sudden he saw that he was on a stage. And there was a man on the microphone. He ended up on a stage. He looked, there were hundreds of people sitting. And the man on the microphone said, and here he is, I've been waiting for. What did you bring for us? He said, well, I have some books. Exactly, that's what we need now. What shall we do with these books? The boy said, distribute. So I asked everybody to come forward and buy one book. And he started distributing all these books to the people. This guy on the stage, he obviously didn't, there was somebody else supposed to come. He was a devotee. So he sold all these books and he said, thank you so much. And then this boy asked, what is it? He said, it's the yearly Butchers Association of Amsterdam. Everyone bought a book. Imagine that mercy, how Krishna can be so merciful. Nityananda can be so merciful that even these people got Krishna's mercy by Srila Prabhupada's mercy. That's wonderful to hear that. It's a great story, isn't it? So whenever we start talking about Srila Prabhupada, so many great stories come out. Brahmananda told me that he had some sort of a thorn, not a thorn, it was a growth on the heel of the bone. And it happens sometimes, there's some growth, it develops on that heel bone, and he couldn't walk. And all the devotees, it was in 2nd Avenue, all the devotees went to see this Dr. Mishra. He was a Mayavadi who had some sort of an ashram in the upper state, New York, where all the rich people live. And Prabhupada used to go there, and after 5 minutes, they were both embroiled in arguing about Mayavadi philosophy. The man didn't take it wrong. He was quite tolerant. And so Prabhupada wanted to show the devotees what kind of ashram we should have in the countryside. And Brahmananda couldn't come. And so after some time, Brahmananda was alone in the temple, the telephone rang. And Brahmananda couldn't walk, so he had to crawl on his 4 legs. Went to the telephone, stood up, said, yes, Srila Prabhupada was there. Brahmananda, Prabhu? Said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. Are you okay? He said, yes, Prabhupada, I'm very okay. Okay, I just wanted to know. Prabhupada hang up. And then Brahmananda walked on his feet to the place where he was sitting. And then he realized that he had no pain to walk from one moment to another. And he touched his heel. There was no pain whatsoever. It was done. It was an amazing event if you think about that Prabhupada had, by Krishna's grace, he was able to do things, such an extraordinary thing of healing Brahmananda Prabhu. And there are many, many stories like that, little stories where all of a sudden people's wishes were fulfilled. Like my wish was to understand Srila Prabhupada, and by his presence, my wish was fulfilled, and I could hear and understand the philosophy Prabhupada was talking very beautifully. And so in London also, many times we walked with Srila Prabhupada around, and even when Prabhupada came the last time to London, we were there, and it was shocking to see Srila Prabhupada in that condition. and he was very skinny, and he was very weak. We had to carry him from upstairs to downstairs. And so then in the middle of that meeting, it was Prabhupada's last meeting to the West, all of a sudden Prabhupada had to go to the hospital. The ambulance arrived because Prabhupada couldn't relieve himself. You know, he had to, the water was in his body. So he had to go for operation. And the Indian doctor told him, Swamiji, you have to go on a machine 2 times a week because your liver is bad. A kidney is bad, kidney machine, right? And Prabhupada said, I'm not going to do that. The doctor said, then you will not survive this year. He said, because your kidney is very bad. And so when Prabhupada was in Vrindavan in his last days, I happened to be there, and I actually massaged Prabhupada's feet, and I could see they were very blown up. They were like balloons, you know. There was, you touch it, it became white, you release, it became red again. So it was toxic. It was obviously kidney failure, very clear. And so this brings up to a story that in the next 3 weeks, there were many things happening around Prabhupada's room. And one time, Prabhupada had intense pain, and he told his servant, Bhakti True Swami, that I had a dream, and one Ramanuja doctor, Ramanuja follower, with a Ramanuja tilak on his forehead, Ayurvedic Vaidya. He was there, and he said that he could hear me. So Prabhupada said, well, call him. So the man came, Adida, the temple president of Calcutta, came over next day to see Prabhupada. And the doctor examined Prabhupada, and he said, yes. He said, Prabhupada, his body is very weak. We have to give him a particular Ayurvedic medicine, Makradvaj. And so I don't know who went. I heard that conversation, and I don't know who went, whether it was Abhiram or whether Lokanath Maharaj went to get that medicine. So the doctor administered the medicine. It's a very important piece you have to hear actually, because I can witness it, I was right there. So the next day, Prabhupada said all of a sudden something that shocked me. He said, I think I've been poisoned. And so I ran to Adida, the temple president of Calcutta, who was staying with his doctor in the guest room in the same room. I said, Adida, you know what just happened, Prabhupada, that he has been poisoned. So he talked to the doctor, and the doctor said, all right, this is not possible. Let me examine. So he examined Prabhupada, and he said, yes, the Makradvaj is not rightly mixed. Homeopathical amount of arsenic acid, but it was not rightly mixed. He said, let's stop the medication. And he stopped the medication, and the next 5 days, 6 days, all the way up to then, Prabhupada didn't complain a single time. So sometimes there are rumors around our society by people who are not very frustrated or very bitter or something. And the answer to or whatever they have said is very simple. I was there, I saw Prabhupada in London. It was very clear his kidney was failing. I massaged his feet personally, and I could see this is what kidney failure does. The blood rises from the legs all the way to the heart. And when it reaches the heart, the person dies. That's what every medical man can tell you. It's very clear. And this issue that became such an issue with people who are not well-meaning about ISKCON, disgruntled devotees or unhappy devotees, is actually very simply to understand. There's nothing to it. And recently I saw Bhakti True Swami's book. He talks about the same incident, and he repeated exactly the same. And there's a very innocent, simple story there at the root of this whole thing. And there's no need for conspirators to construe stories that are not possible for a pure devotee. Pure devotee is under Krishna's protection, always. And none of the people that were around Prabhupada in the inner circle, they were the best. I mean, there was Krishna Goswami is very dear to Prabhupada, did an enormous amount of work. Prabhupada trusted him to become the first GBC for all of India. He was there, and there's Bhakti True Swami. Bhakti True Swami, he joined us in Germany, joined the Hare Krishna movement. He was a student of engineering or something. And then he left for India after some time. And the next thing we heard that he was first initiated and second initiated. We were shocked. After a week or two, he became first. And then he took sannyas. I mean, we didn't, we couldn't understand the word anymore. And so, in fact, one of our godbrothers, my godbrother, he said, Srila Prabhupada, why do you give him first initiation, second initiation, almost on the same day, and then next week or something, you give him sannyas? He said, the answer is very simple. He was more advanced when he was born than you now. Was Prabhupada's answer, you know? Because it is a fact. I mean, I have been in India now many, many years, with interruptions, of course, but I can understand that India is glorious. It's still a place of religion. Naturally, the age of Kali is coming in, especially from the West. But altogether, if you go into the villages, the religion is still very pristine and very beautiful, and people know how to be mothers, how to be fathers, how to be uncles, how to be grandfather, how to be this or that. And it is culture. We don't have this in Europe. Prabhupada said actually, when traveling in Europe, that the only country where he has seen culture in all of Europe was Italy. And devotees asked him why. He said, well, look at the Sunday feast. I saw. There was a son there, he became a devotee, the mother was there, the father was there, the grandfather came, grandchildren came, and the whole family tree appeared in the Hare Krishna movement, like you have sometimes in India, and that is culture. That is culture. That is in the Italian nature. They are very family-oriented people. And they have great respect for grandparents. And the parents are very interested in what the children do and look at it with loving eyes, instead of trying to love the children for what they want them to be. They love them for what they are. And so Prabhupada immediately picked up on that. That's the glory of India. And Prabhupada actually said to one of my godbrothers, he planned to go back to India. He said, I started the Hare Krishna movement. We came from the West to India, and now I want to go to India for the rest of my life and preach in India. And we see the explosion that we have in the Hare Krishna movement in India. You know, it's unbelievable how India came up in the last so many years. And I mean, I was told for 2014, this temple started to exist. And now such an amazing operation has been started up by the work of dedicated devotees. So Prabhupada, he was very insightful of people. He could understand people's mind. And this brings up to the discussion we had in the beginning. I wanted to tell you this. You saw this picture of this professor in Germany, Professor Durkheim. And there it is. You see, this person is actually a very highly decorated, from the government, highly decorated man. He was the ambassador of Germany to Japan. And when Hitler came to power, he immediately left his embassy because he didn't want nothing to do with Hitler. And because Japan was in alliance with Hitler Germany, and Italy was, so he was frightened for his life that he would be sent home for prosecution. And so he went into a monastery, into a Zen Buddhist monastery, and became a Zen Buddhist, a famous Zen Buddhist that actually brought Zen Buddhism to Germany and to Europe and to the rest of the world, together with one French Jesuit, Christian Catholic Jesuit, Father Père Lassalle. He was highly intelligent. I saw this. I had to pick him up. I convinced him that he should come and see Prabhupada. I picked him up. And at one stage, we talked about riddles. You know what a riddle is, right? And like this famous riddle, what goes on 4 legs in the beginning, in the middle on 2 legs, and 3 legs in the end? That's a riddle, you know? And I said, I have one riddle, Professor Durkheim, that nobody has been able to solve. He said, come on, give it to me. So I gave it to him, and he went like this, and after about 5 minutes, he said, I got it. And he presented the solution. It was unbelievable. He was 72 years old. His mind was like a razor blade, so sharp, you know? And so he spoke to Prabhupada very happily, and they were like brothers. The whole conversation were like 2 brothers, because Prabhupada was the same age like him. Durkheim was 2 years younger than Prabhupada. And so in front of all these devotees that are sitting in the room, Durkheim sat on the floor, you know, cross-legged, Zen Buddhist, and he listened to Prabhupada. Prabhupada asked, Professor Durkheim, I'm glad you came. Nice, you made all this way for 500 kilometers by train to see me. May I ask you, what is your philosophy? And Prabhupada always asks this question at every beginning of a conversation, what is your philosophy? That's the first question Prabhupada asks. Otherwise, you don't know who you're talking to. And Durkheim explained, you know, from the beginning of his life, his experience with transcendence, that he had a transcendental experience, that he saw God was actually protecting him. And on and on and on, then he talked about Zen Buddhist philosophy, which means a philosophy without a God, without soul. They know reincarnation, but what happens in Zen Buddhism, and Buddhism in general, it is a mind that travels, which is true. The mind is going, wherever the mind, wherever the mind goes. So, but he didn't come to the point of soul. And so he asked Durkheim after some time, Durkheim asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, what do you think of this? And Prabhupada said, not very intelligent. And so Durkheim laughed, you know. He was not upset. He laughed. He said, why do you say it's not very intelligent? And Prabhupada explained to him the philosophy that this is the mind, but actually at the root of all this is a soul. And so in the continuation of this conversation, he repeated these things that we have to understand. A, we are not the body. B, we are spirit soul. Very important. C, we are part of God. And D, our duty is to serve God. And repeated this a couple of times. So at the end of the discussion, Durkheim all of a sudden stood up in front of all these young people. We were 19, 20, 22, right? A whole room full of it. Everybody was young. He stood up and he paid a dandavat in front of Prabhupada and grabbed his foot. And he said, Swamiji, please accept me as your brother. You know, which was as much as I could understand. And so in the next couple of weeks, days, not weeks, couple of days, they were walking together wherever Prabhupada walked with him. Durkheim was so happy. I showed some pictures of morning walks. Is it coming through? It doesn't work, sorry. And they enjoyed each other's atmosphere like anything, association like anything. And I remember when I brought this professor to the railway station, he said that I have met many swamis, many gurus, many babas, many saints, many avatars over my life. I met the Pope, I met so many religious people. He said, but I've never met a person like your spiritual master. He said, this was the greatest day of my life. And it's so significant that such a famous person would, after 3 days, come to this conclusion that he had never met a person like Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was extraordinary. That he was able, what he was able to do, no one else could have done. That Prabhupada did, because he had this enormous compassion. He had this enormous commitment to Krishna. Even when he was leaving his body, one devotee said, Srila Prabhupada, you have done so many things in this life, wonderful things. And Prabhupada said, very slowly, he said, that is my duty, D-U-T-Y, duty. It was wonderful to hear that right from his mouth. I was standing right there. D-U-T-Y, my duty. And so when Prabhupada left his body, day before, he said something very significant. Everything was significant, but this was particular. I heard this and I was right there. And so his servant gave him some medicine. And Prabhupada said, did you close the bottle? Because Prabhupada was a medical man, and he would take a bottle, takes the top off, put it here, takes the medicine, put it here, holding onto the bottle all the time, then taking the top and screw it, and then administer the medicine. This is the way, because otherwise you may knock over the bottle and all the medicine falls all over the place. So Prabhupada trained his servants, if you take medicine, take it out and put it here and close the bottle and administer. So he said, did you close the bottle? He said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I forgot. And then Prabhupada said, that is your disease. He said, all of you. You know how to open bottles, but you don't know how to close them. You start so many new things, but you don't see the consequences. This is modern civilization, opening bottles. Why do we have this environmental crisis? It's just opening bottles. They don't see the consequences. The rivers are polluted, the oceans are polluted. They invent plastic. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The whole world is drowning in plastic. All these ideas, I want to do this, I want to do that, opening this bottle, opening that bottle, that, and the whole world is ruined because of opening bottles and don't know how to close them. Then he continued. You see, in such a little thing, how Prabhupada expounded the whole philosophy on such a little thing. You know how to open bottles, you don't know how to close them. You start so many new things. You don't see the consequences it has. And then he said, you know how to live, but you don't know how to die. And so I have to show you how to die. And so then Yaduba was called, and he filmed it. And you can see that film, The Final Lessons, that they made a film how Prabhupada was passing away. You see, so he would not just talk, he would show it up to the very end, how he left his body. Shortly before that, he lifted his hand and he said, everything moving, there's the last sentence of Srila Prabhupada, everything moving and non-moving, there's nothing but Krishna. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. And then he left his body. Hare Krishna. He didn't say even the whole word. Krishna was already gone in the first syllable of the word Krishna. So his life was extraordinary from the beginning to the end. And many, many devotees have experienced after Prabhupada's passing, how Prabhupada is there. Because he reasons ill who think that Vaishnava dies, but he's living still in sound. And one of the most striking examples is what I heard from my godbrother, Chandramoli Maharaj. And he told me, I asked him, I heard about it, so I went to him and tried to find out, is that really true? He said, yes, one time I was reading Srila Prabhupada's books. He said, I read a lot, sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours a day, loud. And so I was reading, and all of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada's voice came in and continued where I had stopped reading at that moment. He saw quite some time, I heard Prabhupada, it was very incredible. He said the atmosphere had completely changed. And it was like listening to a tape recorder. He said, Prabhupada was there, he appeared in sound. And so from there we can understand that these scriptures that Prabhupada gave us are very, very powerful. They're actually written by Srila Prabhupada, he's there. And whenever we touch a book, we actually touch Srila Prabhupada. And I have personal experience by distributing books. Had somebody in the book there? Can I have a book? Whatever you have there in front of you, can I just use this for a moment? You might be interested. You have to stay here. Stay here. If I would distribute books, I used to always use a little leaflet, something very simple, because everybody takes that, right? Here, this is for you. So he has a book already in his hand. Makes a big difference. He has it there. He touches Krishna. He touches Prabhupada. And I would say like this, this is for you. And I smiled at him, giving this to all the wonderful, all the intelligent, or whatever I would say people in this town. Take one. You read it. Your life will never be the same. He said, really? So then I would ask him to give a donation, something. He said, well, what? He said, whatever. So as soon as he grabbed in this pocket, I would say, and even if you give only 500 rupees, it doesn't matter. And he went, oh, it's okay, just give 100. So, but you see, I show you this because if somebody's a book distributor, try that. You know, you give a little leaflet. Sometimes we had no leaflets, we used toilet paper. Just to give him something he would touch and then put the book behind it. You know, a very good trick. As soon as I touch, Prabhupada said, even if somebody reads just one word of these books, even if he reads just one line, one page, it is transcendental. He touches Krishna. And so I give you an example. There was this famous, probably the most famous philosopher in this world, in Germany, Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. And Sharma Sundar, he studied Heidegger, this philosopher of last century, very, very powerful philosophy, so-called transcendence. His most famous was being and time. Being, the being, we are in time. What does that mean? And so Sharma Sundar called me, you should probably see him. So I went. And down all the way from Frankfurt down to Freiburg, and I knocked at the door, and a woman came out and said, I said, Mother, don't worry, relax. I'm a monk, nothing to worry about. And I came to see your husband, Professor Heidegger, my spiritual master. He's a famous spiritual authority, would like to talk to him. And she said, it is too late. I said, why? Did he pass on? He said, no, he's upstairs. He said, so? He said, he cannot understand anything anymore. And so I said, well, then he can't complain either, isn't it? And she said, that's true. She laughed. And so she said, yes, you can go upstairs. So I sat beside him for a moment. She was there at the bed. She was watching what I was doing. And I said, Professor Durkheim, no notion. Professor Durkheim, not Professor Durkheim, Professor Heidegger, no notion. And then I took the Bhagavad Gita that I brought and I touched his hand, the Professor Heidegger. And immediately his hand went there, like this. Then the other one. And he actually lifted, his wife couldn't believe it. He lifted the book, opened his eyes and said, Bhagavad Gita, I know this book. I know this book, Bhagavad Gita. I know this book. And he was holding it to his heart, you know, and fell unconscious. His wife said, how did you do that? He said, I've not seen him like this since a year. How did you do that? You know? And you can see the power of the book. It's Krishna himself, Bhagavad Gita, you know, that for a moment he became awake from his slumber. He died shortly after that. He was holding this like a child, Bhagavad Gita. So Krishna is in his Bhagavad Gita and Prabhupada is in his books as well. He told us many times, I mean, these books, these are not ordinary books. It's not a matter of a book. They're actually the presence of Krishna, spiritual master of our entire disciplic succession. I mean, we used to distribute hundreds of books. And we, in the morning when we were distributing, before we go out distributing our rounds, we had a Bhagavad Gita in our arm, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, 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 Rama. It distributed so many books during the daytime because of it, you know, giving Krishna to people. It was miraculous what happened at times. So I think I want to close now. I thank you very much. You listened very nicely. And maybe if I do another lecture like this, I have some more ideas, something more to tell you. In the meantime, thank you for coming. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Oh, Premananda Hari.
Hare Krishna. So we are very grateful to His Grace Prithu Prabhu for so nicely enlightening us about so many pastimes of Srila Prabhupada, through which we can see how Prabhupada was so compassionate, so loving, and so amazing also. So let us thank Prabhuji by loudly chanting Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Tomorrow also we'll have his association. Hare Krishna.
I have a question. This, which you were telling us, the Prabhupada's last sentence was this consciousness, Krishna consciousness.